When Alara stepped through the towering iron gates of the Ravenwood estate, she felt as if she were crossing an invisible line between her old life and something she did not yet understand. The mansion stood silent beneath a pale sky, its tall windows reflecting the late afternoon sun like watchful eyes. Everything about the place whispered wealth, power, and a loneliness so deep it seemed to echo. She had not come here by choice. 3 months earlier, her older sister Lyra, graceful, brilliant, and adored, had died in a tragic accident. Lyra had been the wife of Adrian Vale, the legendary CEO whose name alone could move markets. The news had shaken the country, not just because of his status, but because the couple had seemed inseparable, almost unreal in their devotion. Then Adrian himself had collapsed days after her funeral. Some said grief had broken him. Others said exhaustion. The official reports were vague. He had withdrawn from public life, leaving his company in the hands of executives while he remained hidden behind the walls of Ravenwood. And now, for reasons Alara still struggled to accept, she had been summoned to replace her sister. Not as a wife, not exactly. The arrangement had been explained in careful legal language. She would live in the estate, attend formal events when necessary, and maintain the image of stability around Adrian's recovery. The Vale family believed a familiar presence, someone who resembled Lyra, would help him return to life. Alara had almost refused, but her parents had been drowning in medical debts. Her job barely paid enough to survive, and the offer had come with a contract generous enough to change everything for them. So she had signed. Now, as the heavy doors opened and a butler welcomed her inside, she wondered what kind of decision she had truly made. The interior of the mansion was breathtaking, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, sweeping staircases, but it felt cold, like a museum no one visited anymore. Portraits lined the walls, most of them featuring Lyra in elegant gowns, smiling as if the world had always been kind to her. Alara paused before one painting. Up close, the resemblance between them was unmistakable, the same dark hair, the same gentle eyes, the same shape of face. But where Lyra had radiated confidence, Alara saw only uncertainty in her own reflection. You don't have to look like her all the time. The voice came from behind her, low, steady, unexpectedly warm. She turned. Adrian Vale stood at the base of a staircase. He looked nothing like the powerful man from magazine covers. He was thinner, paler, his dark hair slightly longer than before, as if he had stopped caring about appearances. But his eyes, sharp, deep, intensely aware, were unmistakable. They held the kind of presence that filled a room without effort. "You're awake," she said, immediately realizing how strange that sounded. A faint smile touched his lips. "I've been awake, just not living." The words settled between them like fragile glass. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He studied her for a long moment, not with discomfort, not with expectation, but with something closer to curiosity. "You're Alara," he said. "Lyra talked about you constantly." Her chest tightened. "She did. All the time. She said you were braver than you believed." His gaze softened. "I think she was right." The first weeks were awkward but peaceful. Adrian did not treat her as a replacement, nor as an intruder. He simply allowed her to exist beside him, like someone slowly relearning how to share space with another human being. They ate meals together in the vast dining room, though often at opposite ends of the long table. They walked in the gardens, where winter roses bloomed stubbornly against the cold. Sometimes they spoke about Lyra, her favorite books, her terrible singing voice, the way she collected antique teacups she never used. But gradually, the conversation shifted. Adrian began asking about Alara's life, her work at a small bookstore, her dreams of studying art that she had never pursued, the silly childhood stories Lyra had probably exaggerated. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, he found her in the library sketching by the fireplace. "You draw," he said, sounding almost surprised. She quickly closed the notebook. "It's nothing. May I see?" Reluctantly, she handed it to him. He turned the pages slowly, his expression changing from mild interest to something deeper. Landscapes, portraits, fragments of imagination, each drawing carried quiet emotion, delicate and precise. "These aren't nothing," he said. "They're extraordinary." No one had ever said that to her before. "I stopped years ago," she admitted. "It didn't seem practical." He closed the notebook gently and returned it to her. Practical things keep you alive. Beautiful things give you a reason to be. From that day on, art supplies began appearing in the library. High-quality paper, paints, brushes, everything she had never been able to afford. She never saw him order them. They simply appeared, as if the house itself had decided she deserved them. Spring arrived, and with it, something new. Adrian started working again. Not at full capacity, but enough that the staff whispered about his recovery like it was a miracle. He attended meetings from home, walked with purpose, even laughed occasionally. And he spent more time with Alara, not out of obligation, not out of grief, but because he seemed to want to. They explored the estate's hidden corners together. A glass greenhouse filled with orchids, a small lake where swans nested, a rooftop terrace overlooking the city lights. Each place felt less like part of a grand mansion and more like fragments of a life he was rediscovering. One night, during a formal charity gala held at the estate, Alara found herself overwhelmed by the crowd. Elegant strangers surrounded her, all curious, all whispering. She stepped outside onto a quiet balcony, breathing in the cool air. A moment later, Adrian joined her. "Too much?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm not built for this world." He leaned against the railing beside her. "Neither am I." She glanced at him, surprised. "You run an empire. That doesn't mean I belong to it." His voice softened. "Sometimes the strongest cages are made of gold." For a while, they stood in silence, watching the stars emerge. Then he said quietly, "You don't have to stay here forever, you know." The word startled her. "But the contract? I can release you from it whenever you wish." Her heart twisted unexpectedly. The idea of leaving felt wrong. "I don't want to go," she said before she could stop herself. He turned to her, something bright flickering in his eyes. "Why not?" "Because this place no longer feels like a prison," she wanted to say. "Because you don't look at me like a shadow. Because when you smile, the world feels lighter. Instead," she said softly, "because you're not alone anymore." Summer brought warmth, laughter, and something dangerously close to happiness. Adrian began spoiling her in ways that were both grand and unexpectedly gentle. Not extravagant displays meant to impress, but thoughtful gestures that revealed how carefully he paid attention. A small art studio was renovated just for her, with sunlight pouring through tall windows. A vintage piano appeared in the music room after she casually mentioned wanting to learn. He arranged private lessons with a renowned artist who treated her not as a charity case, but as a serious student. When she protested, he simply said, "You deserve a life that feels like yours." But the greatest gift was not material. It was the way he looked at her, not through her, not past her, but directly at her, as if she were someone entirely new. One evening, they sat by the lake watching fireflies dance over the water. "Lyra loved this place," he said softly. Alara nodded. "She told me once it felt like time slowed down here." He turned to her. "It does. Especially when I'm with you." Her breath caught. For the first time, there was no ghost between them. No comparison. No unspoken name lingering in the air. Just two people, fragile and real, sitting side by side under a sky full of quiet light. "Adrian," she said carefully, "I could never replace her. I don't want you to." His voice was steady, certain. "I don't see you as Lyra's sister anymore. I see you as Alara. Someone who walked into a house full of grief and filled it with color again." Emotion welled in her chest, too strong for words. "You brought me back to life," he continued. "And now I don't want to imagine a world where you're not in it." Autumn arrived in a blaze of gold and crimson, painting the estate in warm hues. By then, the mansion no longer felt silent. It felt alive, like a place that had remembered how to breathe. On the anniversary of Lyra's passing, they visited her favorite garden together. No cameras, no staff, just quiet remembrance. Alara placed white roses by the fountain. Adrian stood beside her, his expression peaceful rather than broken. "Thank you," he said after a long moment. "For what?" "For loving her. And for loving me enough to stay." She met his gaze, her heart steady in a way it had never been before. "Staying wasn't a sacrifice," she said. "It was the beginning." He reached for her hand, not as a replacement, not as a desperate grasp, but as a promise. The touch was warm, grounding, real. For the first time, the future did not feel like a shadow of the past. It felt like something entirely new, waiting to unfold. And as the autumn leaves drifted around them like falling stars, Adrian Vale, once a man hollowed by loss, stood beside Alara not as someone haunted, but as someone reborn. Not because she had taken her sister's place, but because she had created a place of her own. A place where love was not a memory, not an obligation, not a fragile illusion, but a living, growing light that neither of them had to face alone.